Night Vision. Following clues left by our ancestors, we unbury the past to reveal a knowledge of unfathomable value, putting us just a little closer to our own true birthrights. From the secret history of a possible bloodline of Jesus Christ, to secret history of America's founders, to the secret history of extraterrestrial interaction on our planet, here to bring light to the night. Your host for Night Vision Radio, Renee Barnett.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Night Vision once again. If you're new here, I hope you like what you hear and see, and come on back and see us again soon. We're going to be talking about the end of the Knights Templar. And actually, I guess that's slightly a misnomer, because we're going to talk about the end of the Templars as they were known. And we all know that there were some survivors who spread out and joined other orders and did other things. But we're talking about when, the end of the Templars as being the Knights Templar and being, basically. And so in that, we're going to be revisiting with you a little trip that we took this week to a few sites that are very pertinent in that story, and also in the story of the Cathars, the so-called Christian heretics that were pretty much wiped out by the Inquisition armies. And but before we do that, I wanted to remind everyone that if you want to get in touch with us, go to our website. It's Rennie's it's newrennies.org. Oh, that's good. I don't have to say the www. You don't really need that anymore. And where we actually have been working, and we've added a couple of products to our site. One being the Bloodline movie that I produced several years ago, and it's not been available for a long, long time. I've had a lot of people asking me, how can they get hold of Bloodline? When is it going to be re-released? And so right now it has been re-released. It's on our website, newrennies.org, and it is available to view on there. So that's the only place that you can see it that I know of. It's certainly the only place that you can see it legally right now, unless you happen to have your own copy. But anyway, and also what we've put up is I don't know if any of you longtime listeners of Night Vision remember the Priory of Zion dossiers. It's a book or a booklet, I think it's 80-some pages of correspondence, private correspondence between my team and the man in the film, Nick Haywood, who represented himself as a member of the Priory of Zion and spoke on their behalf. We had a lot of communications with him prior to the filming and after, and continuing on for many years. But this is the original Priory of Zion dossiers that we released before, and we ran out of copies of. And so now it's digitally available on newrennies.org. But and a little bit later, I might bring up something else that's going to be available there that's going to blow your mind. I'm just going to tell you right now. But before I go any further, I would like to introduce to you once again Night Vision historian James Martin. Hey, James.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon.
I'd like to remind everyone we're coming from southern France, so it's 4 a.m. here. A little bit odd hour for me to be doing the show. Normally, where I'm sitting in Los Angeles, it's actually 7 p.m. It's such a huge difference. And I'm already done pretty much before prime time in L.A., and it's 10 to midnight on the East Coast, obviously. But anyhow, James and I went on an expedition along with our good friend Jeannie, who's also a researcher and archivist. And we decided, well, actually, James chose the site that he wanted us to see. And he had never been there himself either. So that was really exciting. So, James, why did you choose that site?
Well, over the past few years, I've been looking at a character who was a known Cathar, who went by the name of Pierre de Fenouillet. And he wasn't just a Cathar, he was very much an out and proud, I'm a Cathar, very proud of it, and all of this. So,
which not everybody was. They weren't able to be because of this oppression by the organized church. So it was kind of a dangerous thing for him to do, but somehow he did it and he sort of got away with it. What do you think that was?
Well, he not just that he got away with it, but whilst his life became difficult, I should just say he was buried, in fact, in a Templar commandery, which I'm currently doing a lot of work on, alongside you, Renee, of course. So that was interesting. Firstly, the idea that there's a Cathar buried in a Templar, well, I should say preceptory, just the distinction between the two. A preceptory is a Templar building. A commandery is the term that we use when the Hospitaller took over the Templar preceptory. So it is a commandery, but at the time...
Well, commandery is not really used in terms of the Templars. It wasn't until later when the Hospitallers came on. So it's really the same thing. It's just a different term that the different groups used.
That's it. And to answer your question, firstly, this Pierre de Fenouillet, who I've mentioned, I think, a few weeks ago, I couldn't find anything about his origins until I was having a look through an academic piece, which included some medieval script, which actually revealed his birth name. I should say, when in history, same as if you're doing your genealogy, if you've got de Fenouillet, it's somewhere of, you're of that place, but he wasn't of that place. His name was Pierre de Saissac, and it was only through marriage that he ended up being known as Lord of the Fenouillet. And the Fenouillet is quite a large area on the approach between, let's just say, Rennes-le-Château and Perpignan. It's not quite that, it's closer towards Guion, another town, but just for argument's sake. So it's a really large bit of territory. And of course, there is a Chateau de Saissac, a ruined castle. So that was the reason for site number one. Where did he come from, and what sort of a background did he have? And I think, as we saw when we went to Saissac, that it was a huge place. He was obviously very wealthy. Well, his family were very wealthy, at least. Beginning with his origins and then what happened during the Crusade, the Albigensian Crusade or the Cathar Crusade in this area, it just put things into a bit of context for me.
Now, people that are familiar with, the history of this area and sort of the underlying mystery and the bloodline mystery are familiar with the village of St. Paul de Fenouillet. Oh my God, I can't say it now. Fenouillet. Is there a relation between him and the wife that Saissac married?
Yeah. So again, it's one of those of that place, and when you've gone of that place, it really means in this period that you own the place. You are the lord of the particular area, or the count, as it might be, of the area. So yes, there was.
That must have been a really a powerful family at that time. And
I mean,
if Paul was also inclined to the Cathar faith. Just a little note of interest in the movie Bloodline. We interviewed a priest, although it was on hidden camera, who showed us a chalice, 13th century chalice that was given to the abbé at the time by Abbe Saunier of Rennes-le-Château, and it purports to be a 13th century Visigothic chalice. So that church was in that same town, St. Paul, of that same family or of that same location. So I wonder more secrets why he chose, to give that piece to that particular abbey or that church. Or I wonder if we might at some point uncover that he gave things to certain people, because it's certainly not anything that they really bring out. And that's why we had to film it, secretly, which, thank God we didn't get in any trouble for. We did a few things that were a little sketchy that I was like holding my breath saying, oh God, please don't do that, crew. But they got the shot. So that, I guess that's what's important. But anyhow, so yeah, the village of Saysac was and the chateau there was huge, enormous, and there's a huge part of it that obviously is still standing. There's a site that you can actually walk around the entire castle. So it's quite an amazing ruin. There's a lot there still to see. Some of the ruins that we see are very ravaged and just maybe a wall or a part of a wall left standing. But this is a giant structure that is just incredible. It seems to be like a center for people to come as well, even today. It looked like they were having events and gatherings there, that sort of thing.
Well, it wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting a real ruin. And especially if you're given the turbulent history of France, it wasn't just, in this area you had a crusade. You then had the wars of religion, Protestant versus Catholic, a really bitter and very long conflict. You then had various invasions from Spain and previously Aragon. So to find something in such good repair, I know that it was, that chateau was restored after the Crusades, and then ended up ruinous from there. But you can really see the different building styles, and you can see all of that. But for me, with our friend Pierre de Fermier, he is a very interesting character, and he ends up owning Père Petus, for example. He ends up, all of the castles in the Fermier are under his control. As I say, there's a lot of the castles, Aguilar, Quéribus, all of the so-called Cathar castles. He ends up losing all of his land. It's confiscated by the northern French, who've invaded outwardly for money, outwardly for religion, but really, I would suggest for money and wealth.
Yeah. And when you were, when you got sort of interested in this character, Pierre, was it because of the history with the Cathars, or was there something else that drew you there first and then you found that out? What was it that sort of prodded you on to be so interested in this person?
Well, for me, the interest was, firstly, when reading history books or, studying history, you find that there are some statements that are absolutes. Um, so I'm one of the worst persons to watch Star Wars with, and that's because Obi-Wan Kenobi says, only the Sith deal in absolutes. Well, that's an absolute statement, so therefore is Obi-Wan Kenobi a Sith? But these absolute statements, there was no connection between the Cathars and the Templars. There were no Jewish Templars. There were no, the absolute statements. And when you scratch beneath the surface and begin to see that, well, actually there was, I'm not suggesting that the Templars were a Cathar order. They weren't. I think it was Helen Nicholson who described the Templars as one of the most boring military orders going. I don't agree with that. But certainly there were a lot of Templars who were, military monks and also cleaners and also farmers and all the rest of it. So when you see in this area this connection with a known Cathar family who donated land to the Templar orders, who I think it was Pierre's brother, who was a Templar knight, you have to just take a step back and go, hold on, I've been told, this is what I've read, this is what I understand, there is no connection. And yet, without going into the location for various reasons, and not intentionally, we have stood above the grave of Pierre, who was then, 23 years after he died, was then exhumed from this Templar preceptory and then burned again, and then burned. I mean, he died naturally in that preceptory, and then he was burned. Why would someone do that if it's not just spite? You've also got to look at the
statement, to make sure that people don't go that way again. And what's funny is they did do so much to humiliate the dead bodies and things like that, desecrate them, and as you said, dig them up and then burn them, and as though they were punishing them still. But what's amazing about it is that as much as they tried to wipe them out, of course we know that didn't really happen, but also the memory of the Templars is just indelible. And there's such an air of mystery and sort of romance around the idea of the Knights Templar. I think people that aren't interested in history at all, necessarily are into the Knights Templar. They hold, there's such an image, to hold up down through history. And it's so funny that they spent so much time, effort, blood, and everything else to wipe them out. And what they did was they made them martyrs, forever.
Well, this is it. And the Cathars and the Templars keep reinventing, each generation explores things, opens a new round of questions, and it's like the Arthurian tales. They keep getting reinvented every so often. The Rennes-le-Chateau mystery, the same. There are a lot of these mysteries. Come back to another to your question before. What got me interested. For those who are watching this radio, I still can't get used to saying watching the radio. But for those of you who are watching, I've just put up a map of the spread of what's called Bogomilism, which we're going to come on to shortly when we talk about our next site. But you can see that the concentration for main communities of Bogomils, Cathars, is subtly different. The Cathars were perhaps from a more stricter order of Bogomilism than some others. There were different orders, there were different bishoprics of Bogomilism. For example, there was a Croatian, a Dalmatian, as it was, bishopric. There were of a church, I should say. There was a Greek, a Byzantine, a Roman church. But for those who are looking at the map, the concentrations in the north of France, not in the south. So the big question for me is, well, what was going on down here that invited so much interest from the Northern French? Still to this day, people refer to France as, the common phrase around here is, Paris isn't France. But you also get a bit of, well, that's what France thinks. And there's still that degree of separation, whether you're in Catalonia, obviously, but even, some real strong Occitan independence that's still not been wiped away after all of these years. And I hope it never does.
Oh, absolutely. I often tell that to people that, they'll say, oh, you went to France, oh, I've been to Paris. Like, no, I'm not talking about Paris. I'm talking about France, down the south of France. Completely different. Although I have to say, I do love Paris. It's a whole different ballgame there. And, people are very different there and here. I mean, I always say, these are the real people, the salt of the earth people that live here. And as we've talked about, we're talking about, the so-called Cathar heresy. I've met people locally that still are practicing Cathars, and I know you've run into a couple yourself. So it's not gone. It's just a little more low key. But people, I mean, as you drive along the roads, you see the signs. Basically, you're in Cathar country, is basically what they say, and that was something I found a little shocking when I got here the first time, because I knew, how the Inquisition had happened, and I know that France is still very much largely Catholic. And so I was surprised to see them proudly displaying the signs about Cathar country. And then, every single Cathar castle is noted, and as you go along, you see big signs and directions to go there. It seems to be something they're quite proud of.
I think so, and I know that there was, I think it was back in 2016 when the government of France decided to merge some of the existing regions. So there was Languedoc-Roussillon, and there was, I think, Midi-Pyrénées, and they merged together, and the people voted on what to call the new region, and there was huge celebrations that finally Occitania is back, because that's the name of the current region. Which I know, really meant a lot to people. When I have got to show the picture of Saysac, for those who are interested in the paranormal or, I don't know, lens reflections, but we're in I identified it as a kitchen, but we're in the kitchen area, and we was just taking some random photos, as you do. And we were going through, I'd taken 63 photos, and some of them are absolutely, some of them are really good, some of them not so. And this one struck out because we tried to explain it. I thought there's a sort of blue shield in front of you, and I thought, I wonder if this is, my mask or something like that. But, I had my mask on my face, and it was behind the camera. So I don't know, a sort of blue Roman shield, something like that.
Well, I don't know, but I thought, it's a window, some light reflection, but none of the windows in there had glass in them. They were either barred or just open. And if you enlarge that picture, you can see a very strange edge to the to the blue shield. But can't figure out what that was.
No, very well. Could be a lens issue. Could very well be you've got some protection or something like that.
I don't know, but it reminds me of the of the blue thing that was. I mean, the light thing that was behind me on a previous show from here in France. I was sitting here, and the light stayed on a particular spot, which was really interesting because it was a very special sort of a commemoration of our friend Tim Wallace Murphy, who passed away a couple of years ago. And it just stayed right there on his hat, which was very, very weird. But we didn't figure that one out either. But we're not ruling out anything, including a reflection of some kind. But just interesting. Things do happen
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah. I mean, there were a few photos. But our next site was somewhere that, again, having not visited, had no way of knowing what we would find. And this was, I think a lot of people assumed that the Cathar sort of started on, one day, it was a cold day in October, we're all Cathars now. And then at the end of Monsador, 1244, on the day of the equinox, it's the equinox, yes. And then everyone stopped being a Cathar. It's not the case. And as we've said, there are elements certainly of that belief system still around today. But there was
And I wonder if we, for people that may not be as familiar with the topic as others, the Cathar heresy, the main difference was, as you said, that there were basically two gods. It was called the dualist belief, as were the Bogomiels, and that's why there's this Bogomil Cathar connection, especially in relation to one of the sites that we visited. Sorry about that.
Yeah, plenty of heresies in this area. It seems like every 50 years, 100 years, something like that. But there was a commemoration to the, to the on top of a place in which 60. So Cathars didn't have priests or vicars or things like this. They referred to them as parfaits. That's, I think, a later description, but bonhomme or bonne femme, good man or a good woman. And there were 60 people, irrespective of what title we wish to give them, 60 people who were followers of the Cathar belief system, who were burned alive on the top of this Bailey. Really, there was, if you imagine we were atop a 20-foot climb, there was a hill, clearly an artificial hill, of which a village was once situated, and the Crusaders completely destroyed it. I mean, removed every trace of it, and then burned, as I say, so-called heretics. And they had a song that they would sing before they commenced their attack. Beni Sancti Spiritus. But either way, I really just can't imagine the sheer terror that must have gone through people's minds knowing what was about to await them. But what I really enjoyed about that site was the fact that there was a commemoration. We put some flowers down, or I should say Jeannie put some flowers down. And there were various grave markers depicting other similar atrocities in the direction. So, for example, Carcassonne, Montsegur, obviously, Béziers. So, where you stood in front of those stones, you were looking in the direction of some other atrocities. And that was very moving, I think. I certainly felt it moving. Not quite the same as Montsegur, but more because I don't think anybody has been there. The place is called Cass, Casses, which gets its name from the Occitan word for chain. But we were the only people there, really. And I really felt that there was a thank you for coming, thank you for remembering us. I was really good. I've just been asked by a listener to sing it. You don't want to hear me sing, not at 4:00 in the morning. But we might be able to put it on as a chant, perhaps at the end of the show. We'll see what we can do.
Yeah. we had somewhat different experiences of that site. I know that you and Jeannie were both very aware of the pain and suffering that had occurred there, and that those stones were commemorating in other areas. And I had, I shared with you before that I had been up to Montsegur, which was obviously another site and probably the most famous site of the siege of a Cathar castle, the most well known. And people usually call it the last bastion of the Cathars, which, it was not, but that's how it's known. I had a completely different experience when I climbed there. It was very emotional. And it was like I couldn't stop crying. And it was really strange because it was completely out of the blue. I didn't know why I was crying. I just couldn't stop. But here, I got a feeling of real peace and like, it's okay. I don't know how to explain that. But maybe it was because we were there and we were commemorating and we were all three extremely respectful of the site and of the people that it represented. So maybe I was feeling that back, that it was
Yeah, could very,
interesting site.
could very well be. Now, that site wasn't too far away from another site, which was very nearly our final stop on this day. So I should explain this was a 180-kilometre round trip in a day, so it was a long day, and this was up towards Saint Felix, Lorigay, or some mostly known as just Saint Felix. And for that one, I'm gonna have to do a bit of explaining as to what got us, what got me interested in that. But let's just say before I sort of drone on, let's just say that too wasn't anything like I expected. I was expecting a very dour, a rundown village, still scarred. San Felix was the site of another set of burnings, and he's famous for someone that we'll talk about later, which is someone called Guillaume de Nogaret. But yeah, I mean, Renee, I don't know what your thoughts were when we got to San Felix, but I was absolutely blown away.
Oh, I was too. For one thing, it's a lovely, lovely village. And I mean, spotless. I've never seen such a spotless little town. And the people were so warm and welcoming. Um, and, a lot of places around here are like a lot of small towns everywhere. You know, like someone new comes in and they're kind of eyed up and down a little bit, like, why are they here? And, what are their intentions and that sort of thing. But, we had people, not just the people that we interacted with that were, managing and working in the restaurant, but the customers. And they all said goodbye when we left, which was really different and wonderful and sweet. So, I feel like, uh, some of those ideas that the Cathars planted in this region of being good people and kind people and caring for each other and that sort of thing, it feels like it still permeates at least that village for sure. What did you think?
No, I completely agree. My puppy was the local celebrity. Nobody could do enough. Getting water, really,
Oh, I
really taken
know.
away. And it's such a
You mentioned that Douglas was with us. I'm so sorry. Um, he's our mascot on these expeditions. He always goes, and he does. he's quite a hit with people, but particularly there in St. Felix, they couldn't do enough for him. It was really sweet. Even after he growled at that gentleman went in the restaurant and got him a bowl of water and brought it out. Very sweet.
Absolutely. And yeah, as I say, just such a beautiful place, and I would recommend. We're not on commission or anything. I would recommend if you're.
I can't remember the name, but I'm going to look it up. And I think I am going to do a commercial for them because they were so nice.
But San Felix, near to Toulouse, absolutely well recommend going there. But the reason that we were going there is to find any semblance of a character called Guillaume de Nogaret, and also one very important part of Cathar history, and that was the Council of St. Felix. And I'll just explain firstly, it's not my view that the Cathars, as I've said, suddenly sprang up. I think that the ideas which they adopted, reincarnation, the vegetarians, again, caring for each other, all the rest of it, that, this is hell. And so when you pass, you go to heaven, but, not to bring more life into hell. It's a very different way of looking at things. And I think that developed over a long period of time, but we have a belief system. What we don't have is an organized church. And this is really where, certainly in this area, so I keep getting asked on the chat, Renee, if I'm going to chant Vini Sancti Spiritu. That's all I'm doing. If you want to,
I just posted. I'd like to hear that as well. But yes, it's a weird thing for them to be singing just before they slaughtered people. But
morale booster. As I say, if we can play later, I'm not sure how we can, but if not, there's plenty of renditions up on YouTube. Listen to afterwards, and just put yourself in the mindset of people who are in towns, villages, really small villages, and one of the last things that you hear are crusaders who've totally encircled your town, chanting in unison this Gregorian chant, or this chant. Not something that I can listen to for any great deal of time. But if we come back to St. Felix, which really isn't that far away from our Cathar memorial, what we've got essentially is an attempt to turn or organize, I think would be the best way of putting it, but to organize the Cathar belief system into a church. And so St. Felix wasn't called St. Felix Lorigay in this period, it was called St. Felix de Caraman. And just to explain, the Lorigay is quite a large area in France. It was once on the British tin trade back in the Roman period. And so it was quite a prosperous area. Other than that, an area renowned for its Cathars. But as I say, there was a how can I put it? It was called the Council of St. Felix, and it was a gathering of Cathars. One of, and I'm quoting here, one of the most imposing gatherings ever recorded in the history of the Cathars. And if you imagine this is sort of an international symposium, it's an international conference, meeting of Cathars from around the place. And this occurs in 1167. And they've got delegations even from Eastern Europe and from what's still called the Roman Empire, but you perhaps know it as the Byzantine Empire. And there is an enigmatic figure, really, called Nicetas. And he's a little bit like the I really don't want to say this, but I'm going to. He's a bit like the Bogomil Pope. So I think they call him Father. I don't think he'd really like me calling him Pope, but we're not too sure exactly who he is. He spoke of quite a bit, but we're not entirely sure which of the Bogomil denominations he's from.
Right. He was the Bogomil bishop, right? And then he became the Pope of the Cathars. Is that right?
Kind of, yes. Whether he's a pope is another thing. But I think they called him Papa.
Papa, exactly.
It was something along those lines. So, yeah, you have this meeting. There's, as I've said, Catharism is still in the area. There have been a variety of Cathar bishops from the east of Europe and further beyond coming into Europe. But the main focus of this council really was to establish a church. And Nicetas is the chair of this council. And if you just again put yourself into the what's going on, there are Catholic churches everywhere, and here are these people having a huge council, huge meeting in complete defiance of Holy Mother of the Church. And Nicetas is essentially saying that, well, look, in the East, we have lots of different Bogomilist churches. As I've mentioned, we've got Croatian, we've got Roman, we've got Greek, we've got all these different churches, and they all get on. But it seems that you've been following dear French Cathars, or Occitan Cathars, perhaps more appropriately, that you've been following the wrong one. You've been following a Bulgarian variant of Bogomilism, and that variant is totally incorrect. Now, just bear in mind, there are Cathar Parfaits who are in attendance at this council, and that might mean if they don't have a church established, then they aren't Parfaits. If Nicetas is saying that they've become Parfaits, or bonhomme, bon femme, whatever, however you want to describe it.
Perfecti, yeah.
Yeah, perfecti. You're not that, because you've been appointed essentially illegally by a heretic church. So you've got the Cathar heresy, and then you've got a heresy within it, and that's what you lot are. But don't worry, Nicetas sorts it out for them. And I think he goes for one of his own denomination, which I think was from Constantinople, which is really quite a strict variant of Catharism, and that's the variant that we know in this area, and probably is the reason why the church thought, okay, we can do something about this. We can get rid of them because they're too strict, too orthodox, and we're not having any of that. And that was Nicetas, basically. And he travelled through Italy. He travelled across the area known as the Languedoc. And really, this council was absolutely essential to Catharism. Certainly, I would probably suggest in France, but certainly in Occitania, in the south of France. It enabled bishops to be elected. So there was a senior bishop, a junior bishop, and if the senior bishop passed, the junior bishop took their place, and then another junior bishop would be appointed presumably from the Parfaits in the area. And again, just a reminder, the Parfaits they're not quite vicars, priests. They very strictly observe the Cathar belief system and have to go through a pretty grueling year in order to become a bonhomme or a Parfait.
From what I learned early on about the Cathars, one of the things that I was taught was that they very much were sort of more equal opportunity, if you want to use that term, that there wasn't like a main person that they would share, and they would actually draw lots to see who would give that week's message or whatever it was. But it sounds to me like, at least at some point, they started organizing themselves and almost in a way patterned along the Roman Church, following with bishops and popes and things like that. Were they more sort of freewheeling, I guess you might want to say, earlier on, and then they started organizing? Because in a way, that was one of the things that was sort of like romanticized about them, was that, we're all equal, and we're all.
When I was looking at Pierre de Stasac or Pierre de Femier, the same person, and looking at this council, which I'd known about for a few years. I've been wanting to get to this place for a few years. Obviously, COVID has prevented a lot of travel to sites. But just for that question, from the back of my head, I remembered. So I'm not quoting exactly here, but I remember one of the arguments being that whilst the Catholic Church has priests, we have Parfaits, and we actually. They actually, don't just talk their beliefs; they live them, and that's the difference between. And I think that was one of the romantic ideas, if you want to use the word romantic. But I think that was one of the great attractions to this increasingly organising belief system. No, I'm not using the word religion, but this belief system that is beginning to organise, because I think it's felt that. Without that organisation, how do we oppose the Catholic Church? How do we oppose, in any solid way? There's strength in numbers, and you've got to have, you've got to organise. Gramsci, agitate, educate, and organise. Same principles. And that's what it does. I mean, we went, if you remember, a few weeks ago to Pius, and we saw another Cathar council that elected one of these bishops following on from this council. And that was one of the bishops for the Rars, for this area around Rennes-le-Château and all of that. So, like I say, this council, organising and perhaps taking some ideas from established churches, but I think beginning to organise. They didn't get very far, though, in their organisation, because, as we know, people were looking and watching, right, and getting ready to attack.
Well, that was the council that was held at St. Felix, Largay, was, I believe, 1196 AD, and the of course, we know that the Inquisition went on after that, and there was a lot of towns and Cathar castles wiped out subsequent to that. So I guess that might have kicked off something, or at least it sent up probably red flags to the church. I would think, they're really getting too together here.
It's 1167 where you've got the beginning, that's when the council was. So really, if you think, you've got 50, 60 years before there's then a huge crusade from any Catholic against you for holding that different belief. And as I say, we're taught that the church is, right. The Roman Empire fell, then we've got the church, and the church was very strong, and was beating away pagans and all of this. I'm sorry, that wasn't the case. They call it the Dark Ages, a different period to this, but they call it the Dark Ages because the church looks like it's not going to exist much longer. Britain's repaganized, and still you have this in our language to this day still. I mean, we call it Thor's Day, the god Thor, Woden's Day, Wednesday, Freya's Day, Friday. We still have the effects of all of this even in our language. And, when we come to the Cathar period in the 12th century, that kind of period, the Catholic Church is going through splits. I mean, from Charlemagne to Frederick Barbarossa. Frederick Barbarossa has this huge argument with the Pope, and these schisms. And then you've got the Orthodox Church in the East. So the Church is very unstable. Again, when we talk about the Templars, perhaps after break, we'll get a flavour as to why this is why that religious instability needs fixed, and perhaps one of the reasons why the Templars ended up being disbanded perhaps was as a bit of vengeance for some of that. But anyway, not going to spoil too much. But yeah, they had 50, 60 years of organisation before some of the worst atrocities of the period occurred.
Mm. So this was, I would imagine, this council was probably held in a time of sort of great hope for that particular group. And, we're getting established, and we're able to practice our beliefs the way that we want. And it must have been kind of a reassuring thing to happen.
Well, I had a thought this morning, Renee, which was, bear in mind, you have a lot of Cathars. Nicetas comes from northern Italy and does so with an entourage of other, Bogomilists. I'm just going to use the word Cathar for ease. Then you've got some Eastern bishops who come along. And, we're in the 1160s, 1167. How did they get from one place to the other? Did they have travellers' checks? Who was offering travellers' checks at the time? Well, the Templars. I don't think they did. There's no evidence, but it was just an interesting thought. I wonder.
You don't believe that they were the first to establish the system of checks, or basically?
No, I do. I was just saying I don't think the Cathars, from Eastern Europe, were using the Templar banking system.
I see.
Right, I'm off to this. I'm off to this symposium, this conference, everyone. If I deposit this here, Mr. Templar, can I go and pick it up over at St. Felix? But wouldn't it be interesting if we did have some evidence of that? So there we go. I'm just looking at people are still asking me to sing. I can't believe the Gregorian chants.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, I've actually put a link in the chat room to the particular chant, unless you want to go ahead and break out into song, James.
Well, I couldn't possibly hope to meet the video link that you posted, Renee. So,
I don't know. I think we should have a contest.
Well, nothing's good enough for the listeners. Is my view on things, and I would only wish to give them the best. And quite clearly, you've done that with the link.
Oh goodness. Yeah. So anyway, if you want to hear someone other than James sing it, there's a link in if you just scroll back upward in the chat room here in the comments on the YouTube channel. that you can click on it yourself and hear it, maybe during the break, which we're going to be going to in just a couple minutes. Next hour, we're going to get into a particular person that has very much to do with this site, and we'll find out what happened, or at least what is purported to have happened to his family, and how he may have gotten some sort of revenge. So that's going to be very interesting, and that is very, very Templar related. So I know you guys are going to want to stick around for more of that. Plus, we've got something else I want to discuss that is so exciting, and you guys are going to be excited about it too. If you're interested in the Knights Templar, this is going to blow you away. So that's all coming up next hour. And so, James, we've got about a minute. Do you have anything to wrap up about this last site that we were talking about in terms of the council?
Just that the site was really important, and really that the constant persecution of the Cathars may have, let's just underline this, so the next hour, may have actually ended up resulting in the end of the Knights Templar. So the destruction of the Cathars may have influenced the end of the Knights Templar. And as I say, this is just an idea, but we've got some evidence that we can bring.
All right. Good. Well, hang in there with us, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it.
Families don't have to talk about everything, but they should talk about how to plan for an emergency. Get tips and resources to make your family's emergency plan.
Welcome to the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. Here you'll find great new content, including the KGRA Classics, great shows from our archives. You'll be able to see the show times and information so you can see what show is currently on air. The on-air live button, so just go to this section and you'll be able to hear the show live with exceptional sound quality. We also have the Vault section. Make sure to subscribe to get access to great content and special features. We have the make content for our latest news and events, so make sure to sign up and you can be part of our forum. So make sure to check out the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. We look forward to seeing you there, and we hope that you enjoy the new website.
Welcome back to Night Vision. I'm your host, Renee Barnett, and I am here with Night Vision historian James Martin. We've been spending the last several weeks touring around this area. James has been showing me some sites that he has located, and some that I've never seen before, and even some he's never seen before, having lived here, but having been sort of stranded at home for the last year and a half or so. Due to the COVID pandemic. So there have been some sites he's been itching to see and itching to show. So we've been getting some of that in, and we've been talking about some of those places tonight. We've been talking about Saysac, the village of Saysac, and the village of St. Felix de Laurier, where there was in 1156, I think you said,
67.
the Catholic Council was held, which was a really, really big deal at the time, and quite huge in this area's history. So, moving on, James, do we want to go forward now to Guillaume de Nogaret, or did you have something else to add before we move on?
No, I think it's a good point to move on to now. Let's advance up to the 1300s. And you've got someone called Guillaume de Nogaret, and there's a bust, looks very Elizabethan to me, but it's in a museum in Toulouse of perhaps what de Nogaret may have looked like without the big Elizabethan frill, perhaps. But a very interesting character. Now, I have been scouring any bit of information, any records, archives, in fact, even communication with a number of universities, in the nature of, my day job, where I can access some academic things. And it's possible that either the father or the grandfather, and there's some debate, but let's say grandfather just for argument's sake, of Guillaume de Nogaret, was one of the victims who was burned at St. Felix for being a Cathar. And just to explain who Guillaume de Nogaret is, firstly, his name, Nogaret. Guillaume, William, Nogaret. There is a small town nearby St. Felix called Nogaret, and in Occitan it means walnut fields. Because I utterly despise this character, I'm going to just insult him by saying it might be that his surname means, William the Walnut Grower. He didn't come from any aristocratic background. He didn't come from a titled or a noble line, although he did clearly come from a family that had some money, because he ends up studying law and then teaching law, becoming a professor of law at Montpellier, before ending up in the service of King Philip or King Philip the Fair, Philip IV of France, and he was responsible ultimately for the destruction of the Templar Order as king. But where did he get his ideas from? So as I say, de Nogaret was quite a rapid rise to power. He became the Chancellor of France twice, between 1307 and 1310, and then later in between 1311 and 1313. And for those who know anything about the Templars, 1307 is a key date within the destruction of the order, as is 1312. And he became, I'm not going to say necessarily the power behind the throne, but he certainly became a very influential character with Philip IV. And firstly, he very clearly had a few bones to pick with the Pope. I should explain that de Nogaret was excommunicated, and during his ascent to advising Philip IV, his MO, his modus operandi, was basically, if he didn't like you, he would accuse you of being a heretic. And the usual accusations, they were homosexual, they were sodomites, was the language that was used then. They were committing unusual acts of magic or dark arts. They were going against the church, the usual arguments that you hear in this time, but that was his principal one. And for for one, where was it, what was it about the Pope? I mean, during this period, you've got France constantly at war with England, and countries are beginning to expand in their power and influence, really trying to shrug off the power of the popes at the time and enforce royal power, the supremacy of the kings. And for me, it just got me wondering, why would Donogre want, or it seems to be at least, why would he have such a fight to pick with the Catholic Church if in fact he was a good Catholic himself? And I just wonder whether or not, witnessing or having heard of members of his own family, I think it was Robert Donogre or Roger, from memory. He was his granddad who was burned. He was from Toulouse. I just wonder whether or not, knowing that family, friends, and members of your family being killed in such a horrendous way would have scarred you. I mean, if you think about the survivors from the Cathar times, who'd witnessed this, I'm not sure that today, we would look at things like PTSD. I'm not sure that we can really comprehend such a horrendous act. And I just wonder whether or not that is perhaps something that influenced him. Because he ends up in 1304. In fact, we've still got the letter that he produced, which is just up on the screen at the moment, which was his plot to go and kidnap the Pope. And the Pope that he was going to kidnap was Boniface the Eighth, who, in order to support King Philip, he'd said, well, we can get rid of the Pope and you can have all of this power and all of the rest of it. And he goes on a military expedition to Italy, Agiani in Italy, and where the Pope is on holiday, basically. He's on one of his retreats. And he breaks in with his entourage and beats violently the Pope. Now, just prior to this, he had accused the Pope of being a heretic, of undertaking homosexual acts, of dark arts, of not being a Catholic, and talk about scandal. And this is 1304. Talk about scandal. Now, fortunately, the Agiani, probably pronouncing that incorrectly, but the people of that town rose up and removed Donogre, thus freeing the Pope, who unfortunately dies a month later, perhaps due to the trauma that he'd experienced being beaten in such a fashion. Anyone who's reading about the Pope, about Boniface, who suggests that he went insane at the end, there is zero evidence for that. And actually, he was exhumed, and there were, some scarring for, the idea of him hitting his head repeatedly against the wall, which was one of the rumours, is just untrue. Well, then you have a period which is, called the Avignon Papacy, or the Capetian supremacy. So Capet or Capetian is the dynasty of the French royal family. And basically where the Pope is in control, the King of France is in control of the Pope. And he sets up, after Boniface has died, a trial to convict him of heresy. Well, the slight problem is there was a Pope after, and then there's a Pope after, Clement V, I think we're familiar with. He was certainly under the control of the king, King Philip. And the one thing that's seems to be in the way between King Philip and Nogaret having it all their way and total control of the Pope is, well, the Knights Templar, the Pope's private army. And if it's right that his obsession for revenge, I mean, this, let me put it into another way. Nogaret is a Machiavellian character. He is sly, devious, in the shadows. I don't think you'd want to trust him. I don't think you could trust him as far as you could throw him. But if he wanted revenge for the Pope, who sanctioned the Crusades and the burnings and all the rest of it of the Cathars, then it does give a very solid motive for why it would be he would go to attack the Templars. You get rid of the Pope's private army, and then it's just the Pope. And, the king has an army then. And perhaps that's the motivation, or perhaps a motivation, for the ultimate attack on the Templars. Just another thing with this. The Nogaret had, on a few occasions, orchestrated messages, secret messages that were, or letters and all of this that were to be opened on a particular day, not just for his attack on the Pope, but also some attacks on other people. So there is a track record of Nogaret operating in the way that we know the Templars ended here on Friday the 13th of October, 1307. Instructions opened in unison across France, and then there's, the attack. There is a track record of him operating similarly with others.
Now, we were discussing this earlier, maybe yesterday, I don't remember exactly, but how that the Nogaret, it would have been sort of an understandable thing that he would have wanted this revenge for, friends and family being, slaughtered, burned, whatever, by the Inquisition. But it wasn't the Templars that did that, but rather, they were the Pope's private army. So was there ever, in your studies, did you ever run across an attempt by the king or by Nogaret to sort of enlist the Templars to join them and be subject to the king rather than the Pope? Do you know if any attempt was made to do that before they decided just to try to wipe them out completely?
But they certainly did so afterwards. I mean, there was some idea of merging the hospital and the Templars together. They were so utterly opposed to each other that wasn't going to work. That was proposed again in 1304. No, when it comes to having the Templars under the control of a particular king, that was one of the things that really set the Templars aside from some of the other orders, chivalric orders, that certainly came afterwards, after the Templars were disbanded, but also before. They were only answerable directly to the Pope. So in that way. I mean, the other thing about Nogaret that I should say, he was smearing the Templars before the orders were sent.
Them heretics and
and you've got Baphomet and you've got all of these other things. So it's almost as if he was beginning to.
They were called, yeah.
Yeah, it was like he was preparing public opinion for some attack.
Right. And again, it was another case of, accusations of aberrant, homosexual acts at the time as well. So that basically it's the same playbook they always used, oh, you're this, you're that, and it seems to apply to a lot of people.
Let me just on that. So I come to the 21st of July, 1306. And de Nogaret personally oversees the removal of the Jews from France and the confiscation of property. Personally oversees it. So, that's one thing. And the absolute plunder under the expulsion of the Jews from France. Again, when we talk about the Inquisition, we think of Monty Python, Spanish Inquisition. It started in France. And what's curious about this is not only was he confiscating Jewish property and all of this in 1306, but he also oversees the same with the Templars. He also orchestrates their trials, joining statements that are made under torture, false testimonies, that kind of stuff. But he really has a bone to pick with the Templars. I mean, this isn't royal authority, and then it being passed down to various players. He is the one that's orchestrating the seizure of some properties of the Templars, albeit the Pope had issued an edict, a bull that all lands were to go over to the Knights Hospitaller. This guy clearly had it's something a bit more than with the king giving instructions, because it was him giving instructions to the king and saying, "Oh, this is a good idea, isn't it?" So, I mean, we know this. This is historical, record stuff. But the motivation and the justification for his actions again might tie in to the Cathars. But ultimately, he didn't succeed, because here's some problems. So I promised. I'm sorry, listeners, but I'm going to have to.
You're going to sing?
No, I'd be grovelling in apology for that. But just to mention, Northern England, Templars, and all of this. But firstly, the Templars must have been tipped off, and I'll come to Northern England in just a second. But we're currently, you and I, Renee, looking at perhaps demonstrating that. For example, there was from a particular Templar preceptory, there was a removal or movement of a lot of valuable goods, including artwork, tapestries, that ended up, and this came from a Templar cutlery, a sort of record book, if you will, that ended up over in Spain. And I was very skeptical about this until we ended up at that Spanish preceptory and saw the items that had been removed just before the Templars were disbanded. It's a very unusual thing to do, to move all of your valuables just before the orders beginning to be disbanded. As I say, Nogaret's frightened of the fact that he's been excommunicated by the Pope that he'd beaten. But now Clement V's the Pope, into total control of the king. Of course, he's exonerated, isn't he? And Philip was excommunicated too, also exonerated. So, the Templars didn't disappear. Ultimately, he took control of the popes, for sure, and got rid of their property in the name Templar, but they didn't disappear. Here's something, let's whet the appetite. I'm not suggesting that I necessarily agree with this, but I am going to suggest two things. One, in Portugal, we know that Alfonso, who was the king of Portugal, was enraged with the idea that the French king had attacked the Templars in such a way when, from his perspective, the Templars have been instrumental to pushing the Moors on the Iberian Peninsula back down into northern Africa. And there were letters between Alfonso and the Pope saying, you can't do this. And in fact, from some of the Aragonese and Castilian kings who were also of the same view, you can't do this. You know, we are at risk now of being pushed back. And so in Portugal, a bit of an IT lesson here. Here's what Alfonso did. Control A, Control C, Control V. He copied and pasted the Templar orders onto a new order, which was called the Order of Christ. And there it is, up on screen. You'll note the use of the Templar or a Templar seal within that from Alfonso. So the Knights Templar quite simply changed their name. They didn't really change the uniform, or at least not for a while. In Portugal, they continued. Here's something that's of interest, though, and this is, again, just to whet the appetite, is perhaps the name Portugal could, in fact, come from Portugal, the port of the Grail. And you can see, you know, just in front of you, for those who are watching, a very interesting seal. On the outside, it says Rex Alfonso, King Alfonso, and then, as you can see in the middle, the stamp of this new Order of Christ. And then you see Portugal or Portugal. If you just look at the bottom of that inner circle, you've got an R. Could it be Portugal gets its name from the Port of the Grail, as opposed to from Portocale, which means fishing?
It's very tantalizing.
Tantalizing, who knows? In Spain, they continued under the Order of Montesa. Montesa was a Templar holding, and they carried on. And by the way, these orders are still around with us today, although, you know, you're not battling Moors or anything else like that. But those orders became reportable directly to the kings. And what's curious about the Order of Christ in Portugal is that order almost certainly is responsible for Portuguese discoveries in the New World.
Now, is that group, is that a continuous line to that group? I know there are a lot of sort of reconstituted Templar groups around that call themselves Knights Templar, and but had no real connection to the original group. So this order that you're talking about is a continuous order.
So we mentioned Alfonso
exists today.
So I've mentioned Alfonso. He's a little later, but he becomes the patron of this order. It's actually, if we've got to be exact, it was King Denis. I often think of the King Denis, but King Denis of Portugal was the person who established that Order of Christ in 1318, from memory. So a handful of years after the Templars were disbanded. The Templars continued, by the way, they in Portugal. They didn't just stop or anything. You know, the Portuguese crown said, no, we need you on the front lines. We need you, you know, defending and all of this until such a time that the military order. So this is very much a continuous, very much a continuous line.
What would their duties consist of today?
Well, today,
largely ceremonial, or?
Well, again, you know, if we look in England, so one of the reasons I wanted to mention Cumbria is, and the north of England, is in Cumbria there are a handful of Templar sites, and there's some interesting carvings in some of the churches over in near to Whitehaven. But in England, we there isn't any documentation confirming the transfer of Templar sites to the hospital. Certainly that's true in Scotland as well, where, if you remember last year, I was translating a document for a mutual friend, a medieval document, which was basically, it was a Cecini, was a confirmation of who owns this territory now, because no one, well, who ran it beforehand, and that was what I think in the 1580s. So who was running the Temple lands and all of this? And it's same in Portugal, Spain. In France, yes, they went to the hospital predominantly. But where is everything? Who's running the place if they've not been transferred? I think the answer is relatively straightforward. The people who were working there anyway. When we think of the Knights Templar, we think of the Knights, and so to come back to your question, the orders of chivalry that came after, the Order of the Garter, for example, which comes ever so shortly after the Templars get into some trouble. These orders are still with us today, and their duties today are ceremonial, really. Advise the monarch, or perhaps it's certainly in Portugal, where you've got the Order of Christ, it's more of a medal, like the Legion d'honneur, and things like this. More of a badge of you're someone of merit, or you've done something, but it still exists.
Well, I know that you've been working on something for a number of years now. I'm not sure quite how long. You can let us know. But it's something I'm so excited about because it's never been done before. And what you've created is an interactive map of Templar sites in various countries that you have identified, a lot of which you visited, some of which you haven't been to yet. And I believe you said if you went to every single one, it would take you like 199 years or something. But I remember when this map was sort of in its infancy, and I was looking through our communications earlier today, and you said, "Oh, I've got 100 sites now on the map." So can you talk a little bit about that map and show us, some images of sort of maybe how it progressed? I know you're not going to be able to show exactly how it's going to work, at least not tonight. We haven't figured out how to get that onto the screen of our podcast, but certainly it's an interactive map. It interacts with Google Earth, and it has Templar sites that James has identified, and each site is clickable and has an explanation of the site and the relevance. So could you tell us a little bit more about that, James, and how that's going to work?
Yeah, so I've been working on this since 2017, and it started really. I'll show you a picture. I know we've had a question about Columbus. Perhaps I can come to that after I've shown you the map. But I was up in the islands of Scotland, where I was chasing Templars. Of course, there's no Templars in Scotland outside of Edinburgh, but I ended up finding a few very Templar-like stones. And one of the key issues with these temple-like stones, and then some of the strange sort of Masonic iconography with some of them. It occurred to me that I could do with putting on a map. I mean, this location in Scotland was on the middle of a peninsula, population zero, post twice a year maybe. And it occurred to me that it might be an idea to put some sites onto a map. So I know you asked me before to see if we've got an earlier version of the map. So that's the earliest
That's
one.
a lot of sites right there.
Taken. But I'll just put up a slightly different image, one that I took earlier on today, which is the one thing that is important for me when we're looking at the Templars is that if my proposal was, if I'm doing a map, then each site must have sources to demonstrate its Templar provenance. And so you can see, for those who are watching this, you'll be able to see that there's some relatively large gaps, certainly in France and Italy and Spain, in central Portugal. It's not because there weren't Templar sites there, it's just I've been cataloguing, hundreds, thousands of sites. And like I say, this has been a labour of love for the past 4 or 5 years, and it's taken me this long to get this far, really. But yes, the idea is, I mean, if there was a method in which I could share my screen and show you how it works, the idea is you click on one of the red crosses, it will give you background and source information about that site. So,
in most cases, of
where possible.
Yes.
And
Now, how many? Do you know exactly how many sites that you have so far?
well, I stopped counting personally at 1,200, but it's certainly around that figure. And
Crazy.
that includes. I mean, these are significant holdings. These are preceptories. The idea with the map, I've said to you before, I think I've got 2 or 3 years left. Just to put the preceptories down, and again, you can see for those who are watching this, there's quite the Templars have quite a lot of property. So the next stage in this is really to physically map areas that they own, so farmland and what have you. But that's sort of part 2 of this project, and that's going to take a long time.
Well, also, just for our watchers and listeners, what we're showing is a flat, static map, but it's much more interesting looking when it's integrated. The whole system's integrated, and you can go to different sections on the globe. Now, how many countries, if you know, have you identified so far as having some sort of Templar evidence?
Oh, around 20, but that's with modern boundaries. The one that I found most surprising was Scotland and Ireland. There was a Victorian called Naidman who basically said, there were 2 Templar sites in Scotland. There was one in Dublin, and that's pretty much it. And actually, when you look at town names, so the document I translated last year, it just for listeners, it wasn't a translation because it was Templar. I didn't know it was Templar. It was actually, I'm not out of courtesy to the Lord who asked me to do this for a sort of mutual friend. But he was trying to demonstrate that his branch of his family actually controlled this area. And it was it was Lord Lindsay, but there's a few of them at the minute, so we'll just leave that one there. And yeah, and then doing some background in translating. Unfortunately, I didn't give him the answer that he wanted, but for me, this was a sort of knock on the door of, here's a site, and here's some ruins, and it's here, and it's been excavated, and it's not on a map. Well, it sort of needs to be, really. So a real large number of sites in Scotland, and again, if I just show you the, I'll try and zoom in using the other image, but you can see certainly red crosses are those sites identified. Germany, Czechia, or the Czech Republic as it used to be, Slovakia, Austria, Hungary, Slovenia, Italy, Switzerland, France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Netherlands, England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland. But for me, I was trying to demonstrate how it might be that if the Templars ended up in Scotland, could I visualize this? So this was how the map started. I found this. So this is long before I started putting crosses on maps, but that's how it started. And the red was zones of control during the wars for Scottish independence. The red controlled by the English Navy, and the non-red, excuse me, in control by supporters of Robert the Bruce. So just demonstrating that there was a possibility that Templars could end up in Scotland, and a handful of them going to Bannockburn. And I suppose
what about the New World?
The New World does feature, but it's got question marks because, unfortunately, when we look, whilst I have my own beliefs, so I think these are my beliefs. Evidence in these things is a little bit more difficult. We were talking before about after the Templars, and we've mentioned we've mentioned Spain and Portugal. In England, it was a retirement home, really, and nothing much really happened. They were allowed to be under house arrest in very comfortable conditions. But in Scotland, something odd happens because the French royal family begin to realise that now there's no Templars around. There's inter-family warfare for the crown of France, and so they establish, about 100 years later, something called the Garde Écossaise, the Scots Guard. And the Scots Guard were an elite group following very similar orders to the Knights Templar, but an elite group who slept in the king's bedroom. That wasn't just their only duty, but that's how serious they were about protecting the king. Someone from overseas, there was the old alliance between Scotland and France. But someone from overseas that wouldn't intervene with French royal disputes. Curious about it though, the names in that guard are the names. Well, I've mentioned Lord Lindsay, but the Lindsays, the Sinclairs. You see the same families over and over in not just the Templars, but then in the Scots Guard. So in that way, the Templars continued to be, a little bit later. And the New World, well, the Sinclairs, the Templars, some of them, were descended from Norse. And the Norse, I did my masters on this, looking at Norse exploration albeit for economics. But the Norse most certainly were trading across the Atlantic, and knew about the New World. Whether they would have called it New World, I doubt it.
No.
But that knowledge must have gone somewhere.
I know one of the question marks is on the Westford Night.
Yeah.
And that a lot of people are familiar with. A very interesting carving or stone that we just don't have any verification for yet. But we have a couple questions from the chat room. But before we get to those, which we indeed will, I wanted to also say, when this map is made available, that it will be still a work in progress, because even though there are more than 1,200 sites, you're still researching. And one thing that we hope that happens is that people will send photographs or bits of information or a coordinate on sites that may not be on the map yet. And it can build that way, in addition to the continuing research that you'll be doing to add in sites. So once you get the map, it will be changing as time goes on. I want to say as we go forward, but I know you hate that expression. So I'll say as time goes on, there will be much more added to the map as it's found, whether it's found by you, whether it's, one of our viewers or listeners or one of the subscribers to the map gets hold of us and lets us know. So
I don't know if anyone can see what I'm showing, but I'm trying. Is
that a screen share?
It's meant to be, yes. And I'm just showing how the map works.
So are you clicking on a cross, or can you click on something? Or is that possible?
Yeah, so I've just clicked on Ribston Hall. I can't, unfortunately, make the screen any bigger, but you can see that there's some sources. Where possible, I will get pictures.
Yeah,
so that
there are pictures on some for sure.
Yeah. But
very interesting. Honestly, I can't rave about it enough, because I remember, oh my goodness, probably 12 years ago or so, an author and researcher by the name of George Smart came out with a book that was a Templar chronology. And I was very excited about it, because one of the daunting things for me about history is the chronology of it, of keeping things in order. While this is happening over here, what's going on here, and that sort of thing. And was that before or after this happened? And so the little book that he put together was extremely helpful in sort of keeping some of that straight, as I was doing my own research. And this is that times a million, for the usefulness that it can provide. And just, I can imagine just sitting in front of it for hours and clicking, or I might have a specific site in mind and I'll look for it there. Oh yeah, there's a cross there, and click on it, see if I'm on the right track. So there's all kinds of things I can see this being good for, not the least of which just pure entertainment, for those that are interested in the Knights Templar, that are a lot of people. So I'm truly excited about it, and it will be available on the website, newrennies.org. Right now, it's not up there, as you'll see if you go there. What we have up there on offer right now is the Bloodline documentary and the Priory of Zion dossiers. And pretty soon, I'm going to force James to put up that map and let us get going with it, even though I know it's still a work in progress. There's a lot to look at, and those who are able to view it, who decide to view it, they'll be able to see any changes that are forthcoming. So it's not like, you get it and then, there's a new version coming out that makes yours obsolete. You'll still have that access. So very exciting stuff in my book.
Yeah, I'm glad you think so, because, like I say, when I started the map, it was really just a sort of idea to, right, I've been there, what else, and I just carried on. So if other people
started it sounded really good, and I've seen some different iterations of it as it's gone forward. But only when I sat and watched how it's going to work this week, in fact, or last week, it blew my mind. I couldn't quit talking about it, and I've been telling everyone about it. So I'm just so excited. I only wish I had done it, but I don't have the patience, or the education, I guess, the background to do it in history. But we have a couple questions that I wanted to bring in. I know Kathy was asking, was Christopher Columbus associated in any way with the Templar group, considering the sails on the ship had, the Templar cross?
I'm not aware of any particular group, but it's certainly plausible that I remember going to a museum in Milan and seeing some display of Columbus, and in his log he'd taken a map, which I thought was a bit odd. If you were discovering the New World, how would you have a map? But in terms of a Templar group, I mean, by the time he's traveling the seven seas, the Templars,
1492.
He doesn't land in the Americas. He lands in the Caribbean for one. And for two, I think he was tipped off by certainly by Templars. I mean, the date's interesting for me. 1492. 1492 is the year the Moors were expelled from the Spanish, the Iberian Peninsula. It's also the same year that the crowns of Aragon and Castile merged to form the Kingdom of Spain. And it just strikes me as a bit odd that off the three ships go, one of them called the Santa Maria, which is not that an unusual name, but perhaps a nod to some groups, that he goes and then comes back and, I've discovered land and it's not India, and isn't this great? Now we've got this unified kingdom, and it just strikes me as a bit more like a the birth of Spain, and then you've got the New World. It just strikes me as a bit of that. The Portuguese were off the coast of the Americas for a very long time. My sense is there might have been a family connection between Columbus and some of the Templar families, maybe Sinclair, and if he did in fact have a map, the only explanation would be he got it through some Moors. I hope that sort of answers, but I'm not aware of any particular group he was associated with.
And Brian is asking for thoughts on Oak Island as a Templar connection. Any thoughts on that?
Whatever was at Oak Island, certainly was being protected. And I don't think we should rule out either the fact that this complicated sort of locking mechanism where this tidal flooding might have been produced by the people who were already living there. That is to say, the native, the indigenous Americans. In the absence of that, it's possible. I would probably suggest the Norse. I mean, the Norse, Erica and Rauda, Eric the Red and Leif Erikson. Eric the Red, ends up in Iceland, and then his son ends up in Greenland, and then these places called Helluland, which, as it sounds, hell-like landscape. In other words, just barren rocks. Markland, which means the place of trees. And then you've got Vinland. And there's a bit of debate. Does it mean the wine land, or does it mean... Wineland, for me, sounds like a shop. Or does it mean fertile land? And it's speculated that the area around Nova Scotia, but Newfoundland, where there is a UNESCO site at Lansing Meadows or Jellyfish Cove, the Norse were there. And if it was them that had any involvement at all with with Oak Island, you've got to question what coconuts don't grow in that area. So coconut fibre, where's it coming from? Either people are sailing much further south than we know, or coconuts are sailing, themselves. Those who've watched Monty Python, you know what I'm on about. Or it comes from a period when there's lots of ships. You say it was Brian who asked that question. Brian, yes, I'm not convinced entirely of a Templar connection, because my question would be, firstly, why would you need to hide treasure if no one knows that the land's there? Or what would be the purpose? Because you have, how can I put it? Gold and treasure and money and all of that is useful for us in Europe, but there's a very different trading system with the Native Americans, and there is an absence of that. Where I think we've got somewhere, though, and where I find very interesting is around Rhode Island. Again, you've got the Westford Knight, but we can't escape the Newport Tower. Which ain't no windmill. I stood on the ruins of a windmill yesterday. Sorry, I'm not a big fan of that idea. Perhaps the Kensington Runestone and all of this, but even coinage that's been found, I would perhaps favour a Sinclair voyage. We know about the Zeno voyages, for example. But Oak Island itself, I'm not too sure. I think while we're all focused on that island, we're sort of losing focus on other areas that it might, there might be something. So maybe broaden the search, but leave Oak Island, in our question mark drawer, if that makes sense. Don't rule it out, but don't just rely upon it.
Well, you mentioned, rather than the Templars, you thought it might be more likely to be the Norse. And, I know that there's been evidence found in the United States, actually just down the road from where I grew up, of the Norse being there. And I believe the date that was written, I'm talking about the Heavener runestone in Oklahoma, was 1012, I believe. So that was, close to 500 years before Columbus ever made it. So if you're thinking that there might have been a Norse presence there in Oak Island or in that northeastern area, what are you thinking the timeline for that would have been? Obviously, pre-Columbus.
We know Lansing Meadows was established. It was a ship repair facility, basically, from what I understand. And one of the problems is they removed the trees off Iceland. There were trees, and they wouldn't regrow because of climate change and other such things. So how do you repair your boats? You need to go where there's wood, and you're either sailing that from Europe or you're going to go over to Vinland, Markland, and these places. So around about 1,000. Look, the key question with this is the eastern and western settlements of Greenland, who the Pope, various popes sent through Haakon, King of Norway, sent delegations to Christianize the last pagans of Europe, and he's referring to those in Greenland. And the description of like a Mary Celeste sort of idea, they got there and, the pans were still boiling, but they were nowhere to be seen. Where did they go? And perhaps that's one of the reasons why the Sinclairs ended up over, or trying to find where the last Norse colony went. Maybe they integrated with the natives. Perhaps that explains some of the anecdotes of language. These anecdotes of the Native Americans were already speaking our language. Perhaps that's one of the ways in that way. But around about 1,000 AD, I would be suggesting, around that period.
Yep. Well, gosh, looks like we've done it again. Time to close the show out. But before we do, I want to remind everyone to please visit newrennies.org. There it is right on your screen if you're watching. And take a look, see what we have to offer. It is definitely a work in progress. We'll be adding articles, a gallery, information on tours, and other services that we'll be making available, some genealogy stuff. And so you can see what your link is to history that maybe you've been obsessed with or fascinated with. You just might find there's some cellular memory going on there. I think there's something to that. I really, really do. And it's been borne out, I know, in my own genealogy, and I think in yours too, James. We've just discovered some new things this past week. But gosh, we're all out of time. James, thank you again. Thank you to our wonderful producer, Bill.
Thank you, everyone.
And join us next week for our Farewell to France show. And hope everybody has a great week coming up. Take care, everyone. Good night.